Imagine waking up one morning and the sun never fully rises, not because of clouds, not because of rain, but because something has blotted out the sky itself, and it stays that way for 18 months. No warmth, no proper daylight, crops dying in the fields, animals refusing to breed, temperatures dropping in the middle of summer. And the worst part? Nobody knows why. This wasn't a scene from a disaster movie. This wasn't a myth or a legend. This actually happened in the year 536 AD. And according to medieval historian Michael McCormick of Harvard University, it was quite literally the beginning of the worst decade to be alive in human history. So what happened? What turned off the sun? And why don't most people know about this? Stay with me, because the story of 536 AD is one of the most terrifying, fascinating, and world-changing events in all of human history.
When most people think about the darkest periods in history, they think of the Black Death in the 1300s, or maybe World War II, or the fall of the Roman Empire. And if you ask the average person what was happening in the 500s AD, most will shrug. It's a forgotten century, a quiet gap between the ancient world and the medieval one. History textbooks skip over it, movies ignore it, pop culture has no interest in it. The common assumption is that the early medieval period, sometimes called the Dark Ages, was just slow, gradual decline, nothing dramatic, just centuries of quiet decay after Rome fell. But that assumption is completely wrong, because in 536 AD, something catastrophic happened that changed the course of human civilization, and for over 1,000 years, nobody fully understood what it was.
Let's set the scene. It's early 536 AD. The Byzantine Empire is the dominant power in the Mediterranean. The Emperor Justinian I sits on the throne in Constantinople, dreaming of reconquering the old Roman Empire. Europe is a patchwork of kingdoms. Trade routes are active. Life is difficult, but it moves forward. And then, sometime in early 536, a mysterious fog rolls in. Not an ordinary fog, a dry, strange, eerie mist that covers Europe, the Middle East, and parts of Asia. And it doesn't leave. For 18 months, the sun is dimmed to a fraction of its normal brightness. Byzantine historian Procopius, writing in real time, described it this way: the sun gave light like the moon, without warmth, without full brightness, for the entire year. Temperatures dropped sharply. Summer temperatures in Europe and Asia fell by as much as 1.5 to 2.5 degrees Celsius. That might not sound like much, but for an agricultural society, it was catastrophic. In China, sources record snow falling in summer. In Peru, ice cores show a dramatic drop in temperatures. In Ireland, tree ring records show 536 as one of the worst years for tree growth in the past 2,000 years. Crops failed, livestock died, famine spread across continents. And this wasn't a one-year problem. The cooling continued. 539 and 540 AD brought more volcanic eruptions, making things even worse. The period from 536 to roughly 545 AD is now identified by scientists as the coldest decade in the past 2,300 years. What followed was inevitable. Weakened, hungry, and desperate populations became easy targets for disease. And in 541 AD, just 5 years after the fog appeared, one of the deadliest plagues in history arrived: the Plague of Justinian, the first recorded pandemic of bubonic plague, which killed between 25 and 50 million people across the Byzantine Empire and beyond. The sun went dark, the food ran out, and then the plague came. 536 AD didn't just ruin a decade, it helped collapse empires, reshape trade networks, and reset the entire demographic and political map of the ancient world. What do we actually know, and how do we know it? For centuries, historians read accounts of the mysterious fog and the cold summers and assumed they were exaggerations, poetic descriptions, ancient people being dramatic. But then, science caught up with history. Ice core evidence. In 2018, a team of researchers led by glaciologist Sebastian Wirth and medieval historian Michael McCormick analyzed ice cores drilled from a glacier in the Swiss Alps. Ice cores are incredible historical records, layers of ice that preserve atmospheric conditions year by year, going back thousands of years. What they found in the layer corresponding to early 536 AD was volcanic ash, specifically ash consistent with a massive volcanic eruption somewhere in Iceland or the North Atlantic region. This eruption was powerful enough to blast particles into the upper atmosphere, where they spread across the northern hemisphere and blocked sunlight for months, then years, as additional eruptions in 539 and 540 added more ash to the atmosphere. Tree ring records. Dendrochronology, the science of reading tree rings, confirms it. Trees in Europe, Siberia, and North America all show dramatically narrow growth rings for 536 and the years immediately following, indicating extremely cold and dark growing seasons. Irish oak trees, in particular, show some of the worst growth of the entire first millennium. Written historical sources. Multiple independent written sources from different civilizations describe the same phenomenon. Procopius of Caesarea, the Byzantine historian, recorded the dim sun directly. John of Antioch and other chroniclers noted the famine and food shortages. Chinese historical records describe summer snowfall and crop failures. The Annals of Ulster in Ireland mention bread scarcity during this exact period. These aren't connected sources copying each other. They are independent observers across 3 continents describing the same catastrophic event. That's powerful corroborating evidence. Harvard's Ultra-High-Resolution Ice Study. McCormick's 2018 study, published in the journal Antiquity, was groundbreaking. By using new technology to analyze the ice cores at ultra-high resolution, essentially reading the ice layer by month rather than by year, the researchers could pinpoint the volcanic eruption to the early months of 536 AD, likely January or February. They could also see the follow-up eruptions of 539 and 540 AD clearly marked in the ice. This study transformed our understanding of late antiquity. The mystery fog was no longer a mystery. Here's where it gets really interesting. You might be thinking, okay, a volcanic eruption caused cooling, caused famine, caused plague. That's tragic. But is there more to this story? Yes, and this is the part most people never hear. The collapse triggered by 536 AD didn't just destroy, it also created. The fall of populations across the Byzantine and Persian worlds, the collapse of old trade networks, and the desperate reshuffling of peoples and powers that followed, all of this created openings. New powers rose to fill the vacuum. And here's the twist that historians are increasingly discussing. The chaos of the mid-6th century created the conditions for the rise of Islam in the 7th century. The Byzantine and Persian empires, the 2 superpowers of the ancient world, had been grinding each other down for decades. The plague of Justinian weakened both empires catastrophically. Their economies were shattered, their armies were depleted, their populations had been devastated by famine and disease following the volcanic winter of 536. When the early Muslim armies emerged from the Arabian Peninsula in the 630s, they didn't face the mighty empires of old. They faced exhausted, plague-weakened, economically devastated shadows of former powers. The Sassanid Persian Empire collapsed entirely. The Byzantines lost Egypt, Syria, and North Africa within a generation. Could the Islamic conquests have happened so swiftly without the catastrophic weakening caused by the chain reaction that began with the fog of 536 AD? Many historians now argue probably not. And there's one more twist. Among the few groups who actually benefited from the volcanic winter were the nomadic peoples of the steppes, particularly groups who had less dependence on fixed agriculture. The disruption of settled agricultural civilizations opened doors for new migrations and power shifts across Eurasia that echoed for centuries. One event, one volcanic eruption, and it reshuffled the entire geopolitical deck of the ancient world. So let's bring it all together. 536 AD was not a quiet, forgotten year. It was the beginning of the worst decade in human history, triggered by a volcanic eruption in Iceland that blotted out the sun, caused a volcanic winter lasting years, produced continent-wide famines, and weakened populations so severely that the plague of Justinian arrived like a finishing blow. The written records were always there, hiding in plain sight. Byzantine historians, Irish annals, Chinese court documents, all describing the same dim sun and dying harvests. It took modern ice core science and dendrochronology to finally prove what they were describing was real. And the consequences? They didn't just end with the 6th century. The chain of collapse and reshuffling that began in 536 AD echoed through the 7th century and beyond, helping create the conditions for some of the most dramatic political and religious transformations in human history. History is rarely a straight line. It's a chain reaction. And sometimes that chain begins with a volcano nobody remembers, in a year nobody teaches, changing everything for everyone. If this kind of deep dive into forgotten history is what you're looking for, hit that subscribe button, because we're just getting started. And drop a comment below. What year do you think was the worst in human history? We might just make a video about it. See you in the next one.